The galaxy's most lethal warrior challenged a human cadet and came face to face with Earth's fiercest weapon, adrenaline and attitude. Commander Vextall stepped down from the shuttle with a swagger that practically shouted, "I'm superior!" And everyone knows it. His armored forearms moved in sync as he walked, each swing designed to highlight the raw power beneath his gleaming chitinous shell. Kepler Station's artificial gravity felt absurdly light compared to Krexnara's crushing pull, which could flatten lesser beings with ease. "So this is the Great Galactic Combat Academy," he muttered, mandibles twitching in what counted as humor for his kind. Charming. The station buzzed with life as cadets of countless species hurried past, and Vextall's compound eyes scanned them all with barely concealed disdain. Ethereal Zaparians floated past like living clouds, their translucent bodies shimmering. A group of rock-like Granitians lumbered by, their stone-hard skins scraping against the metal walls. Even a few of those aquatic Mercians were present, their environmental suits sloshing with their homeworld's brine. But it was the humans that made Vextall's antenna twitch with disgust. "By the Great Hive," he whispered, watching a cluster of them walk past. They looked so soft, pink, fragile. The humans moved with an odd confidence that Vextall found irritating. They were small, averaging barely 6 ft in height, with no natural armor, no claws, no venomous barbs, no apparent defensive mechanisms whatsoever. Their skin looked thin enough to tear with a gentle poke. How these pathetic creatures had managed to crawl their way off their backwater planet and into the Galactic Federation was beyond his understanding. "Commander Vextall." I presume the voice belonged to Instructor Threshnak, a tall serpentine Naga, whose scales shifted colors with his emotions. Currently, they were a nervous yellow-green. "That's correct," Vextall replied, extending one of his 4 hands in the traditional Krexari greeting. "I trust my reputation precedes me." Threshnak scales flickered to an even more anxious shade. "Oh, it does indeed. 3-time champion of the Krexnari Death Rings, undefeated in over 200 matches. Your combat techniques are legendary, as they should be." Vextall's chest swelled with pride. "I've come to bring some actual discipline to this academy. I understand you've been having trouble with the newer species." "Well, yes, but perhaps we should discuss the humans specifically." Vextall cut him off, watching another group of the bipedal creatures shuffle past. "I've reviewed their physiological data. No natural weapons, thin skin, brittle bones, limited strength. Honestly, I'm surprised they survived long enough to develop space travel." Threshnack's scales turned a deep amber, which Vextall recognized as the Naga equivalent of concern. "Commander, with respect, perhaps you should know that humans are classified as what? Delicate flowers that need special treatment." Vextall waved a dismissive hand. "I've read the reports. Threshnak Deathworlders, they call them." "What a joke. Their planet has slightly higher gravity and a few predators. My home world would eat their so-called Earth for breakfast." The Naga instructor's tail coiled nervously around his lower body. "Sir, I really think you should review the full classification files before what? Before I show these soft-bodied weaklings what real combat training looks like." Vextall's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Trust me, Threshnak. After a few sessions with me, these humans will either toughen up or wash out. Either way, this academy's standards will improve dramatically." They entered the main training facility, a massive chamber with reinforced walls and multiple combat circles marked on the floor. Various alien species were engaged in practice matches, their instructors calling out corrections and encouragements. The air thrummed with the sounds of combat, grunts of effort, and the occasional victory cry. That's when Vextall saw her. She was human, obviously, with that typical pale skin and those ridiculous strands of hair cascading down her shoulders. But something about this one made his compound eyes focus more intently. She moved through a combat sequence with fluid precision, her form perfect as she executed a series of strikes against a practice dummy. Her muscles, while small by galactic standards, seemed to coil and release with surprising efficiency. "Who is that one?" Vextall asked, pointing with one of his secondary arms. Threshnak followed his gaze, and his scales immediately shifted to deep red. "That's Cadet Zara Mitchell. She's one of our top human students." "Commander, perhaps we should start you off with some of the other species first." Nonsense. Vextall's voice carried the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly challenged. "She'll be perfect for my first demonstration. The other students can watch as I show them what happens when proper technique meets primitive flailing." "Sir, I must strongly advise. Your advice is noted and ignored." Thresh Vexel's forearms crossed in a gesture of finality. "Tomorrow morning I'll begin with the humans, starting with this, Zara Mitchell." As they watched, Zara completed her sequence and turned toward the observation deck. For just a moment, her eyes met Vexel's through the reinforced glass. The human's expression was neutral, almost bored, but something in those dark eyes made the commander's exoskeleton prickle slightly. He dismissed the feeling immediately, probably just the environmental systems acting up again. "Prepare the combat ring, Threshnak," Vexel commanded, never taking his eyes off the human female. "Tomorrow, these Deathworlders learn what real death looks like." The Nag Instructor's scales had turned completely black now, a color Vexel had never seen before. But the commander was too busy planning his demonstration to notice. After all, how dangerous could one small, soft human possibly be? The next morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a funeral march. At least, that's how it felt. To every instructor who knew what was about to happen. Threshak had spent most of the night trying to contact Academy Command, hoping someone with more authority could talk sense into the new commander. Unfortunately, Vexel's credentials were too impressive, and his appointment too recent for anyone to interfere. "Attention, cadets." Vexel's voice boomed across Training Bay 7, causing several of the more sensitive species to WS. "Today you will witness proper combat technique as demonstrated by a true warrior." The assembled students formed a loose semicircle around the main combat ring. Representatives from nearly every Federation species were present. The graceful Voltari with their 6 limbs, hulking too with their tusks and thick hide, the crystalline Chardon whose bodies chimed softly when they moved. And yes, a handful of humans clustered together near the back. Vexel strutted into the center of the ring, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dominance. For too long, this academy has coddled weak species and allowed inferior techniques to flourish. Today, we begin correcting that mistake. Cadet Blickton, a young Voltari with nervous energy radiating from his feathery appendages, raised one of his hands tentatively. "Sir, what exactly will we be learning today?" "Patience, young Lingling." Vexel's mandibles clicked in what he probably thought was a reassuring manner. "First, you must understand the fundamental difference between real combat and the playground games. You've been taught." He gestured to a practice dummy made of reinforced polymer, the kind designed to withstand impacts that could dent starship hulls. With a casual movement of his primary right arm, Vexel struck it with an open palm. The sound was like thunder, and the dummy bent nearly in half before snapping back upright. Several cadets stepped backward involuntarily. "This," Vexel announced, "is power. This is precision. This is what happens when a warrior from a real world applies proper technique." His compound eyes swept the crowd, clearly enjoying their intimidated reactions. "Now, who would like to volunteer for a practical demonstration?" The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Even the usually eager to cadets found something fascinating about their feet to stare at. No volunteers. How disappointing. Vexel's voice carried the kind of fake sadness that made everyone's skin crawl. "Very well. Ishal choose." His gaze moved methodically through the crowd, passing over the obviously powerful species, Theones with natural armor or size advantages. Finally, predictably, those compound eyes settled on the cluster of humans. "You," he said, pointing directly at Zara Mitchell, the small one with the dark hair. "Step forward." Zara looked around briefly, as if confirming he meant her, then shrugged, and walked into the ring. Her movement was casual, almost lazy, like someone heading to grab a sandwich rather than face off against a trained killer. The other human cadets exchanged worried glances, but none of them seemed particularly surprised by the selection. "State your name and homeworld for the record," Vexel commanded. "Zara Mitchell, Earth." Her voice was steady, unimpressed. "Is this going to take long? I have a thermodynamics exam at 400 hours. A few cadets actually snickered at that, which made Vextal's antenna twitch with annoyance. "Your academic schedule is irrelevant. Human, today you serve as an educational tool." He began circling her like a predator, though Zara simply stood in place, occasionally checking what appeared to be a chronometer on her wrist. "Tell me, Mitchell, what do you know about combat?" "Enough to get by," she replied with the kind of boredom usually reserved for discussing tax regulations. "Enough to get by," Vexel repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "How delightfully modest. And what combat training have you received on your little backwater planet?" "The usual stuff. Mixed martial arts, weapons training, survival courses." Zara scratched her cheek absently. "Nothing special." From the observation deck, Threshnak made a sound that might have been a prayer in his native language. Several other instructors had gathered to watch, their expressions ranging from horrified anticipation to morbid curiosity. "Nothing special," Vex almost, stopping his circling to face her directly. "Let me educate you about something, little human. Your species evolved on a world so pathetically mild that you never developed any real survival instincts. No natural weapons, no protective hide, no enhanced reflexes. You are quite literally the least threatening sentient species in the known galaxy." "Okay," Zara said, apparently unperturbed by this assessment. "Okay." Vexal's mandibles clicked rapidly now, a sign of growing agitation. "That's your response. Okay. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Deathworlder. The way he said the word, Deathworlder, made it sound like the punchline to a particularly cruel joke. "I understand you think you're intimidating me," Zara replied, finally showing some emotion, though it seemed more like mild amusement than fear. "Are we going to fight, or are you planning to lecture me to death?" A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled cadets. Even the Toggen, who weren't known for their emotional sensitivity, seemed shocked by the humans' casual disrespect. Vexal's exoskeleton darkened slightly, a physiological response to anger among his species. "Very well, human. Since you're so eager to learn, let me show you the difference between a real warrior and a soft-bodied pretender." He dropped into a combat stance that was immediately recognizable to anyone who'd studied Krexari fighting techniques. Forearms spread wide, center of gravity low, compound eyes tracking multiple potential attack vectors simultaneously. It was the same stance that had made him undefeated in over 200 matches. Zara, meanwhile, simply stood there with her hands at her sides, looking for all the world like someone waiting for a bus. "Your technique is abysmal," Vexel continued, beginning to circle. "Again. Your stance is weak, your guard non-existent, your situational awareness practically zero. A real fighter would have disabled you 3 times already." "Would have," Zara agreed pleasantly. "But didn't, because I'm demonstrating not attacking, you ignorant child." Vextal's voice had risen to nearly a shout. "When I do attack, it will be swift, precise, and educational. The other students will learn what happens when proper technique meets amateur flailing." In the crowd, a human cadet named Marcus Chen leaned over to whisper to his companion, Should we tell him? His friend, Alina Rodriguez, shook her head slowly. Too late now. Besides, he wouldn't listen anyway. Vexel had moved close enough now that Zara had to tilt her head slightly upward to maintain eye contact. The size difference was dramatic, his bulk making her look almost childlike by comparison. Any last words before your lesson begins, human? His voice had dropped to what he probably thought was a menacing whisper. Zara glanced at her chronometer again. Yeah, she said, meeting his compound gaze with those unsettlingly calm, dark eyes. This better be quick. I really do have that exam. What happened next would be analyzed, debated, and referenced in military me's across the galaxy for decades to come. Not because of its complexity, but because of its devastating simplicity. Vextall, his ego now thoroughly bruised by the humans, casual indifference, decided to escalate his demonstration. Since words seem insufficient to penetrate your thick skull, perhaps a more direct approach is needed. He raised his primary right hand, the one that had just demolished the practice dummy, and aimed it at Zara's face. This will be a gentle correction, human, just enough to get your attention and show you the consequences of disrespect. The strike that followed was textbook Krexari precision, a controlled palm thrust designed to be firm but non-lethal. By Vextall standards, it was barely a tap, equivalent to a light slap among his own people, the kind of corrective blow he might give to an unruly young ling. The sound of Chetna's palm meeting human nose was sharp and wet. Blood exploded from Zara's nostrils in a crimson spray that seemed impossibly bright under the training bay's lights. Her head snapped back from the impact, droplets of red spattering across the white floor in a pattern that would later remind witnesses of abstract art. A collective gasp rose from the assembled cadets. Several of the more sensitive species actually stumbled backward, their faces showing expressions of shock and horror. The Voltari cadet, Blixton, made a sound that might have been a whimper. There, Vexel announced, with satisfaction, pulling his hand back and examining it with mild distaste. Human blood was disturbingly sticky compared to proper akami. A simple demonstration of superior technique meeting inferior anatomy. Notice how minimal force was required, too. He stopped talking. Zara hadn't moved. She stood exactly where she had been before. The strike. Blood streaming from her broken nose in twin rivers that dripped steadily onto her training uniform. But she hadn't stumbled. Hadn't cried out. Hadn't even raised her hands to touch the injury. She simply stood there as motionless as a statue, staring at him with those dark eyes. Eyes that had changed. Where before there had been mild amusement and casual disinterest, now there was something else entirely. Something that made the temperature in the training bay seem to drop several degrees. Something that caused several cadets to take unconscious steps backward, though they couldn't have explained why. Interesting, Zara said quietly, her voice slightly nasal due to the blood flow. You know, Commander, where I come from, there's an old saying. Vexel felt his compound eyes trying to focus more intently on her face, searching for the fear or pain he expected to see. Instead, he found something that made his exoskeleton prickle with unease. And what saying is that, human? His voice carried less confidence than it had moments before. Never hit someone unless you're prepared for them to hit you back. The way she said it, with the same casual tone she'd used to discuss her exam schedule, was somehow more unsettling than if she'd screamed it. Blood continued to drip from her nose, but she made no move to wipe it away. From the observation deck, Instructor Colamine, an elderly centurion with decades of combat experience, leaned forward with sudden alarm. By the 7 moons, she whispered, to Threshnak. Look at her pupils. Threshnak's scales had gone completely white, a color none of his colleagues had ever seen before. Commander Vexel, he called out, his voice cracking slightly. Sir, I think we should silence. Vexel snapped, though he never took his eyes off Zara. Something was happening to the human, something he didn't understand. Her posture had shifted, subtly, though she still appeared to be standing casually. Her breathing had become deeper, more controlled, and those eyes. "You seem upset, human," he said, trying to inject mockery back into his voice. "Did my gentle tap hurt more than expected?" "Oh, it didn't hurt at all," Zara replied, and that might have been the most terrifying thing she could have said. "I was just wondering something." Wondering what? How long it's going to take? Vexel's antenna twitched. How long? What is going to take for my body to finish processing? What just happened? Zara's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "See, when humans get hurt, really hurt, our bodies release certain chemicals, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. It's an evolutionary response from when we had to survive, on a world that was actively trying to kill us every single day." The blood from her nose had begun to clot, but she still made no move to clean it away. If anything, she seemed to have forgotten it was there entirely. "The thing is," she continued, "these chemicals take about 30 seconds to fully kick in. 30 seconds for a human brain to switch from civilized persons to apex predator who just got threatened." Vexel felt something cold crawl up his spine. "What are you saying, human?" "I'm saying you have about 25 seconds left to apologize and walk away." Zara's smile was small and pleasant, the kind someone might use when offering directions to a lost tourist. "Because in 25 seconds I'm not going to be Zara Mitchell Academy cadet anymore. You're threatening me." The words came out as a statement rather than a question. "No, Commander, I'm giving you a chance." She glanced at her chronometer again, and Vexel noticed with growing alarm that her hands weren't shaking. They were steady as bedrock. 20 seconds now. Around the training bay, an eerie silence had fallen. Even the Torgon cadets, known for their love of combat, were backing away from the ring. The other human students had moved to the very edge of the observation area, their faces showing expressions that Vexel was only now beginning to recognize as anticipation rather than fear. "This is ridiculous," he declared, though his voice had taken on a slightly higher pitch. "You're a soft, weak human from a backwater planet. I am a trained warrior with over 200 victories. You cannot possibly the 15 seconds." Zara interrupted gently. Vextol's 4 hands clenched into fists, his pride already wounded by her casual dismissal of his superiority, now recoiled at what felt suspiciously like a challenge from prey. "You think your pathetic species biochemistry intimidates me. You think some primitive adrenaline response makes you dangerous. 10 seconds. I have broken opponents twice your size. I have killed predators that would hunt your entire species for sport. 5. Something in her voice made every single person in the training bay hold their breath. 4. Vexol's compound eyes were fixed on her face, watching for any sign of the aggression he expected, any indication of the attack he was prepared to counter. 3. Her expression never changed. She might have been counting down to a birthday party. 2. Vexel shifted his weight, preparing to demonstrate once and for all why Krakari warriors were feared across the galaxy. 1. And then Zara Mitchell stopped being a cadet and became something else entirely. What happened next lasted approximately 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds would be replayed in slow motion on security feeds, analyzed frame by combat specialists, and referenced in every xenobiology textbook written for the next century. But to everyone watching in real time, it looked like magic. Zara moved. There was no wind-up, no telegraphed attack, no battle cry or dramatic pose. One moment she was standing motionless with blood on her face, and the next moment she was simply somewhere else doing something that physics suggested should have been impossible. Vexol's compound eyes designed to track multiple fast-moving objects simultaneously lost her completely. She had been 3 FT away directly in front of him. Now she was beside him, slightly to his right, her small human hand wrapped around his primary. arm just above the elbow joint. "How did you?" he began. The sound that interrupted him was sharp and final, like a tree branch snapping in a strong wind. Except the branch was Vexel's arm, and the wind was Zara Mitchell applying leverage and torque with the casual efficiency of someone opening a particularly stubborn jar. The scream that erupted from Vexel's mandibles was unlike anything anyone in the training bay had ever heard. It started as a high-pitched whistle, escalated to something resembling a steam engine under pressure, and then dissolved into a series of clicking, chittering sounds that might have been Krexari swear words or prayers or both. His primary right arm, the same one that had casually destroyed the practice dummy and broken her nose, now hung at an angle that defied anatomy. The chitinous plates that served as his natural armor had cracked in spiderweb patterns around the breakpoint, and a thick green fluid that passed for blood among his species was beginning to seep through the fissures. Zara released her grip and stepped back, wiping her hand on her training uniform with the same casual motion someone might use after handling something mildly unpleasant. "There," she said, her voice returning to its earlier conversational tone. "Now we're even." Vexel collapsed to his knees, cradling his shattered arm against his chest. His remaining 3 limbs trembled as shock began to set in, and those compound eyes that had looked so confident minutes before now darted around the room as if seeking an escape route. "Impossible," he whispered through his pain. "Impossible! Impossible! Impossible!" The reaction from the assembled cadets was immediate and primal. The Voltari students actually took flight, their feathery appendages carrying them to the upper corners of the training bay where they huddled like frightened birds. The Toggen, despite their natural aggression and thick hides, backed away so quickly that several of them stumbled over each other. Even the Crystal and Chardon, who typically moved with dignified precision, were scrambling toward the exits with musical chimes of panic. Medical team to Training Bay 7 came the announcement over the facility's communication system, emergency medical team to Training Bay 7 immediately. But none of the alien students were looking at the fallen commander anymore. They were all staring at Zara, who had returned to her original position and was now checking her chronometer again. 12:37, she announced to no one in particular, still have time to grab lunch before that exam. From the observation deck, Threshnak finally found his voice. "Mitchell, report to medical for evaluation." "I'm fine," Zara called back, dabbing at her nose with a piece of cloth that had appeared from somewhere. "It's just a bloody nose. I've had worse from sneezing too hard." "That's not what we're worried about," muttered Instructor Calamin. Though her voice carried clear across the now silent training bay, the medical team arrived with all the efficiency that decades of dealing with training accidents had taught them. They were a mixed group of species, each selected for their expertise in treating different alien anatomies. The lead medic, a tall, graceful healer named Sinindar, took one look at Vexel's arm and immediately began barking orders. "Bone stabilizer, neural suppressor, and someone get me a full-spectrum scanner," she snapped, her 6 hands moving and practiced. "Coordination. This isn't just a break. This is complete structural failure." As they worked to stabilize the commander, lifting him onto an anti-gravity stretcher, Vextal's eyes remained fixed on Zara with an expression that mixed pain, confusion, and something that might have been newfound respect. "How?" The word came out, as barely a whisper. "How is this possible? You're so small, so soft." Zara looked up from her chronometer and Methus gaze with those same calm, dark eyes. "Commander, can I give you some advice?" He managed a weak nod. "Next time you want to demonstrate superior technique, maybe don't pick the species that evolve by fighting everything on their planet and winning." She smiled, and it was the same pleasant, friendly expression she'd worn throughout their entire encounter. Earth didn't make us soft, it made us survivors. As the medical team wheeled Vexel out of the training bay, his voice could be heard echoing down the corridor, repeating the same word over and over. "Impossible. Impossible." The remaining cadets continued, to give Zara a wide berth as she gathered her things and headed for the exit. The human students, however, seemed completely unsurprised by what had just occurred. A few of them even looked slightly disappointed. "That's it?" Elena Rodriguez asked Marcus Chenis. They followed Zara out. "I thought he might last longer." "Nah," Marcus replied, shaking his head. You could see it in her eyes the moment he hit her. Classic Deathworld response. Poor bastard never had a chance as the training bay slowly emptied. Threshnak remained on the observation deck, staring at the blood drops still visible on the floor. His scales had cycled through so many colors during the encounter that he wasn't sure what hue they'd settled on. From somewhere behind him, Instructor. Kalaman spoke quietly. "I don't suppose anyone bothered to tell the commander about human grip strength." Threshnak's laugh came out as more of a hiss, or their bone density, or their reaction times, or their pain tolerance, or the fact that they're one of the few species that actually get stronger when they're hurt. They stood in comfortable silence, for a moment, contemplating the lesson they'd all just witnessed. "Think he'll file a complaint?" Kalaman asked. Threshnak's scales finally settled on a deep purple that indicated grim amusement. "Against whom? The human who defended herself or the instructor who was stupid enough to hit a Deathworlder in the first place? Below them, maintenance. Crews were already arriving to clean up the blood and reset the training equipment for the next session. By tomorrow, Training Bay 7 would look exactly as it had before Commander Vextol's educational demonstration. But none of them would ever forget what they'd learned about the difference between looking dangerous and actually being dangerous. 3 hours later, Commander Vexel lay in Medical Bay 2, staring at the biocast that now encased his primary arm, from shoulder to fingertips. The advanced polymer matrix was slowly encouraging his bones to heal, but the process would take weeks, and the humiliation would last considerably longer. The painkillers had finally kicked in, reducing his agony to a manageable level, though they did nothing for his wounded pride. Every time he closed his compound eyes, he saw those 30 seconds playing out again. Zara Mitchell's casual countdown, her terrifying calm, the impossible speed of her movement. The sound of the medical bay doors opening made him turn his head, a movement that sent fresh waves of pain through his injured limb. Station Commander Keith Moore entered, a massive Ursinian whose bear-like appearance and gentle demeanor had made him popular among the cadets. Today, however, his usual smile was nowhere to be seen. "Commander Vextol," Keith Moore said, settling his bulk into a chair that creaked ominously under his weight. "We need to talk. If you're here to discipline me for inadequate teaching methods, I'm here because of this." Keithmore held up a datapad displaying what appeared to be an incident report. "Do you know what happened to the last instructor who struck a human student?" Vextol's antenna twitched weakly. "I wasn't informed that there had been a previous incident. There wasn't." Keith Moore's expression was grim because every other instructor in the history of this academy has been smart enough not to hit a Deathworlder. You're the first. The words hit Vextol harder than Zara's retaliation had. But their classification files said they were from a mild world, low gravity, temperate climate, limited predators. "Did you read past the first page?" Keithmore asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Vextol's silence was answer enough. The station commander activated his datapad, and a holographic display filled the space above the medical bed. "Let me educate you about humans, Commander. Earth's gravity is actually higher than average for inhabited worlds. Their atmosphere has a higher oxygen content than most species can tolerate, and those limited predators you mentioned." The hologram shifted to show various Earth creatures: massive predatory cats with razor-sharp claws, pack-hunting canines with bone-crushing jaws, serpents with venom that could kill in minutes. "These are their apex predators," Keithmore continued. "But here's the interesting part. Humans didn't just survive alongside these creatures. They hunted them for sport. They turned survival into entertainment." Vextol stared at the images with growing horror. "But they look so fragile, so soft. Appearances can be deceiving. The hologram changed again, showing human anatomical data. Their bones are incredibly dense, their muscles can generate tremendous force in short bursts, and their nervous system is optimized for rapid response to threats. When threatened, their adrenal glands flood their bodies with chemicals that increase strength, speed, and pain tolerance by factors that would bellethal to most other species. The 30-second countdown, Vextall whispered, the pieces finally falling into place. Exactly. You gave her body time to fully activate its combat systems. Keithmore leaned forward, his expression serious. Commander, you didn't just hit a student. You struck a member of the only species in the galaxy that evolved specifically to kill things bigger and stronger than themselves. The medical bay fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the biocast's regeneration field. Vexel processed this information, feeling his worldview crumble and reshape itself around this new reality. The other instructors tried to warn me, he said. Finally, they did. Threshnik filed 3 separate requests to delay your first session with the human students. He wanted time to brief you properly on their capabilities, and ignored him. Vexal's voice carried the weight of newfound understanding. I thought they were being overcautious about weak, primitive creatures. There's nothing primitive about a species that can break a Krixari warrior's arm bare-handed, Keithmore observed. The humans call it hysterical strength, but there's nothing hysterical about it. It's a calculated biological response to perceived threats. Vexal shifted uncomfortably in his bed, wincing as the movement jarred his injured arm. What happens now? Will I be court-martialed? Dismissed from the academy? Keithmore was quiet for a long moment, consulting his data pad. That depends. Cadet Mitchell has filed her report, and it's remarkably generous considering the circumstances. Generous. She described the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding between species with different cultural norms regarding physical contact. Keithmore's expression might have contained the ghost of a smile. She's requested no disciplinary action be taken against you, provided you complete a mandatory xenobiology course focusing on Deathworld or species. She's protecting me. Vexel couldn't hide his astonishment. After I struck her, broke her nose, humiliated her in front of other students. She's protecting me. That's another thing about humans, Keithmore said, rising from his chair. They're remarkably forgiving, provided you learn from your mistakes. Miss Mitchell seems to believe you've learned yours. As the station commander moved toward the door, Vexel called out weakly, Commander, what about my teaching assignment? Keithmore paused, his back still turned. Oh, you'll continue teaching, but there's been a small adjustment to your curriculum. What kind of adjustment? You'll be instructing exclusively human combat courses from now on. Keithmore's shoulders shook with what might have been suppressed laughter. The human students specifically requested you. Apparently, they found your teaching methods quite educational. The medical bay doors closed behind him, leaving Vexel alone with his thoughts and his shattered arm. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of the academy continuing its daily routine. Cadets training, instructors teaching, the steady hum of a facility dedicated to preparing young beings for the challenges of the galaxy. Somewhere in that facility, Zara Mitchell was probably taking her thermodynamics exam. Her broken nose barely an inconvenience in her day. Tomorrow she'd return to training, ready to learn new ways to be deadly efficient, and Vexel would be there too when his arm healed, ready to teach her. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent his entire career believing strength came from size, armor, and natural weapons. Now he understood that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones that didn't look dangerous at all. His compound eyes drifted to the biocast encasing his arm. And for the first time, since arriving at the academy, Commander Vextall began to laugh. It was a soft clicking sound that gradually grew louder until it filled the medical bay. After all, he'd wanted to teach the humans about real combat. He just hadn't expected to learn so much in